They say when your mother dies, something inside you goes quiet. But when I saw her body laid out on the steel table, something inside me screamed. I had seen hundreds of corpses before. I'm a mortuary technician. I clean them, stitch them, paint their lips so their loved ones don't flinch when they say goodbye. Death, to me, had rules. Patterns. A rhythm you get used to. But my mother's body broke that rhythm. Her skin was too pale, like wax left under moonlight. Her eyes were closed, but I had the sick feeling they weren't really resting. Her mouth was sewn shut, the way we always do it. But it looked like she'd been trying to say something when she died, like the thread was holding back a final word. I hadn't seen her in years. We didn't speak after I left Asheville. She never called, never wrote. Then yesterday, the hospital rang. Evelyn Mercer, 59, found dead in her farmhouse. No visible injuries. No forced entry. No foul play. Natural causes, they said. I don't know why I asked to handle her body personally. Maybe guilt. Maybe curiosity. Or maybe I already felt something was wrong before I ever saw her on that table. I pulled on my gloves, rolled up my sleeves, began the standard exam. No bruises. No signs of trauma. Her veins were dark, her hands cold. Normal for a corpse. But then I lifted the sheet. And there it was. At first, I thought it was a burn, dark, raised lines in the middle of her abdomen, just below her ribs. But the longer I looked, the more I realized it wasn't a scar. It was a symbol. A pentagram. Perfectly shaped. Carved into her skin like it had been etched there with a branding iron. The lines were too deep, too precise to be accidental. And strangest of all, the edges pulsed. Faintly, like blood was still moving under them. I stepped back. My breath caught. I blinked hard. Still there. The room felt colder. I turned to check the thermostat. It hadn't changed. I leaned closer to her stomach. The line seemed to shimmer, just for a second. I swear, I heard something. Like wind passing through a crack. A sigh, or maybe a whisper. That's when the lights flickered. Just once. Quick. Like a warning. I dropped my tools and backed away from the table. She was dead. She was definitely dead. But I couldn't stop staring at that mark. It wasn't ink. It wasn't paint. It was part of her. And worse, something about it felt familiar. Like I had seen it before. Not on her. On me. The memories came like broken glass. A dark room. My mother's hands blood-soaked. Candlelight. Crying. Chanting. And the image of the same symbol, drawn in red, under my newborn body. I gasped. The truth hit me in the gut like ice water. I wasn't born in a hospital. I was born on a pentagram. And it was never supposed to be found. The road to Asheville looked like a scar cut through the forest. Cracked pavement. Twisted trees leaning too close. Fog that didn't move, just sat like a patient hunter. I hadn't been back in over a decade, and everything looked smaller, but somehow heavier. Like the town had been waiting for me. Like it remembered. My hands gripped the steering wheel harder than they needed to. The radio stopped working miles ago. Static, then silence. Just the hum of the engine and the whisper of tires over old asphalt. As I passed the rusted sign, "Welcome to Asheville. Population 1,321, I noticed someone had scratched out the last number. It now read 132. Maybe that was a joke. Maybe not. The town hadn't changed much. The diner still had the same peeling sign. The church was still boarded up. The gas station looked abandoned, but the lights inside flickered like dying fireflies. The people, though, they looked different. I slowed as I passed Main Street. 3 old men sat on a bench outside the grocery store. They watched me like they knew who I was. Like they'd been expecting me. One of them nodded once, slow and deliberate, then tapped his cane on the ground. I didn't stop. My childhood home sat at the edge of town. A crooked white farmhouse surrounded by dying trees. The paint had peeled, the windows were fogged with dust and cobwebs, and the wind chime on the porch didn't make a sound, even as the breeze picked up. That silence, it was loud. I parked in the gravel driveway and stared at the house. Memories pressed against the back of my skull. Shadows crawling under the door at night. My mother whispering to herself in the dark. The smell of burnt sage and something sour. I didn't want to go inside. But I did. The door creaked open easier than I expected. No resistance. No lock. The air smelled like mold, old paper, and something metallic. The kind of smell you only notice in basements or funeral homes. The floor groaned under my weight as I stepped inside. Home, I muttered, though it didn't feel like it. The furniture was still there, dust-covered and sunken. The hallway mirror was cracked, spiderwebbed like something had struck it from the inside. The wallpaper had peeled down in strips like shedding skin. Every step I took echoed like the house was empty and angry. I went upstairs first. My old room was untouched. Same bed. Same bookshelf. Even the poster of a space shuttle I used to stare at as a kid. I ran my fingers across the windowsill, feeling the tiny carvings I made with a pocket knife when I was 12. Stars. Circles. And one strange symbol I didn't remember drawing. It looked like a spiral swallowed by teeth. I backed away from it. Down the hall, my mother's room was locked. I kicked it open. The air inside was colder. Her bed was neatly made. Drawers shut. Curtains drawn. On the nightstand sat a single candle, half-burned, surrounded by a circle of black salt. I didn't know what it meant, but I knew it wasn't for decoration. That was protection. Or warning. I opened her closet. Nothing but clothes, and a small wooden box tucked behind her shoes. I pulled it out. It was heavier than it looked. Inside there were 3 things: a burnt photograph, a rusted key, and a thin leather-bound journal tied shut with red string. The photo was of me as a baby. I was swaddled in a white cloth, cradled in my mother's arms. But the image was scorched on one side. The edges were black and curled like it had been caught in fire. Her eyes were wide. Not in joy. In fear. Like she didn't want to hold me. I placed the picture aside and picked up the key. It was old, ornate, with strange markings down the side. No label. No tag. Then I looked at the journal. My hands hesitated before untying the string. The leather felt warm, like skin left too long in the sun. I opened it. The first page was blank, except for one line. He was born on the seal. He carries what I could not stop. I swallowed hard. A floorboard creaked behind me. I turned fast, but nothing was there. Still, I couldn't shake the feeling that something had moved. Something just out of sight. Watching. Breathing. I clutched the journal and whispered to the empty room. "What the hell did you do, Mom?" The house didn't answer. But the wind outside picked up, and this time, the chime on the porch started to sing. Not a melody. A warning. I sat on the edge of my mother's bed, staring at the old journal in my hands. The leather was cracked, dry as bark, with strange faded symbols burned into the cover. I hadn't noticed them before. Maybe the dust had hidden them. Maybe I hadn't wanted to see. The room still smelled like her, lavender and something else beneath it. Something faintly metallic, like blood left too long in the open air. The windows were shut, but the curtains danced like someone had exhaled gently across them. I told myself it was just the draft through the floorboards. That's all it was. I opened the first page. Her handwriting was there, neat and small, like she was always afraid someone might read it. I began reading slowly, my eyes tracing the words with care. March 12th. They watched me again today. From the woods. From the cellar. I never see their faces anymore. Only their shadows. The pastor says I was chosen. That this is holy. But it feels wrong. My stomach burns in my sleep. I paused, fingers tightening around the edge of the page. I flipped through a few more entries, each one darker than the last. She wrote about voices coming from the drain. About waking up with dirt under her nails. About blood in the sink when there hadn't been any wounds. Then the entries changed. Not just in tone, but in handwriting. The ink was darker, almost oily. The letters sharp, angular, like they had been carved instead of written. It didn't look like my mother's writing. It barely looked human. He kicks when the stars burn red. He hears me when I whisper to the walls. The womb is the gate. The child is the lock. The sigil is the key. I closed the journal for a moment and held it against my chest. My heart was racing. I could feel sweat on my neck, trickling slowly down my back. A creak echoed from somewhere below the house, like a single footstep on the old wooden floor. I didn't move. I just listened. Silence. I looked back down and flipped further in. One page had been torn out, ripped clean from the binding. Only a jagged edge remained. I touched it gently. The paper was darker there, as if soaked in something once. Then something caught my eye near the back of the journal, a folded sheet wedged between the final pages. I pulled it out slowly. It was a photograph. My mother, young, pale, sitting in a bathtub full of dark water. She looked exhausted. Her eyes were hollow, her arms wrapped around her swollen belly. The photo was slightly burned on one corner, and on the belly faint, but unmistakable, the shape of a 5-pointed star. Not drawn. Not tattooed. Raised. Like a brand. I turned the photo over. In that same sharp, jagged handwriting, someone had written, The vessel must never forget what it was made for. I dropped the photo. My hands were shaking now. The shadows in the room seemed thicker somehow. Heavier. As if the corners of the ceiling were deepening, stretching back into blackness. I stood up too quickly, and the floor groaned under me. I could barely breathe. I looked around the room, half expecting someone, or something, to be standing there. But it was empty. Just me. And the journal. I clutched it tightly, walked out of her room, and shut the door behind me. As the door clicked closed, I thought I heard something. A breath. A sigh. I told myself again that it was just the wind between the walls. But I didn't go back to sleep that night. Not after what I'd read. Not after what I'd seen on her skin. And definitely not after I realized. I had the same mark. Hidden. Faint. Dead center of my own stomach. I hadn't been back in Asheville long, but already the town felt smaller than I remembered, like it had curled inward on itself over the years. The air was thick with fog and silence. The kind that made every sound feel too loud. The kind that made you feel watched. They held a vigil for my mother at the old community chapel. It was more of a barn with pews than a real church. Cold wooden benches. Candles flickering in mason jars. People who didn't know her, or pretended they did, sat in still rows like they were afraid to move too much. I kept to the back, in the corner near the coat rack. I didn't want to talk. I didn't want to hear fake words from fake mouths. But then he walked in. David Aldrich. I didn't recognize him at first. Not until he took the pulpit and began to speak. His voice hadn't changed. Low, smooth, like a stone rolling down a well. I once knew Evelyn Mercer, he began, standing with a black coat draped like wings across his shoulders. And I know grief carves us deeper than most things can. People nodded. Whispered. But, he continued, smiling faintly, from every death something is born. Something deeper than memory. Something eternal. And sometimes, what is born is not entirely ours. I blinked. Did anyone else hear that? A cold wind slipped through the gaps in the walls, making candles flicker. For a second, I thought I saw the flame on the altar bend backward. Away from him. David scanned the crowd, but then his gaze locked on me. I froze. His eyes were dark, bottomless. Not angry. Not kind. Just endless. Her son is here, he said softly, almost lovingly. Thomas. The one born on the seal. Every head turned toward me. I stood. My heart beat against my ribs like it was trying to get out. I didn't come for this, I said, my voice hoarse. David smiled wider. No, but you've come home, haven't you? I left. I couldn't sit there under his eyes, feeling the weight of 1,000 unspoken things pressing against my chest. Outside, the air was colder than before. I lit a cigarette with shaking hands I hadn't noticed were trembling. Then a voice. Still smoked the same brand. I turned. David stood on the chapel steps, hands folded neatly. What do you want from me? I asked. He tilted his head. Want? Nothing. The path is already beneath your feet, Thomas. Whether you walk it or not. You're not a preacher, I said. You never were. He chuckled, deep and warm. You're right. I'm much older than that role. I started walking. He didn't follow. But his voice followed me down the gravel path. You were born under a blood moon. Not by accident. You were carved into the world. I didn't answer. I walked faster. When I got home, I locked every door. I couldn't sleep that night. Something kept scratching in the walls. Around 3 a.m, I stepped into my bedroom barefoot, and something sharp pricked my soul. I turned on the lamp. There, carved into the floorboards beneath my bed, was a fresh pentagram. The same shape I saw on my mother's body. The lines weren't ink. They were burned into the wood. And they were still warm. I didn't sleep that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw flames flickering in the dark, shadows dancing behind them like they were waiting for me. Waiting for something inside me to answer their call. By morning, the air in the house felt heavier. The walls seemed closer. And the basement door was wide open again, even though I remembered locking it the night before. That's when Clara called. I need to show you something, she said. Tonight. No questions. No small talk. Just that. Her voice was tight, like someone gripping a secret too long. We met near the old train depot at midnight. The wind carried a strange smell, damp soil mixed with something metallic. Clara wore a thick coat and carried a flashlight in one hand, a knife in the other. You ever wonder why this town feels wrong? She asked as we moved down an overgrown trail. Every day, I said. Because it's not just the town. It's what's under it. We stopped at a collapsed coal shaft behind the hills. The The wood beams were rotted, barely holding back the weight of the earth. She pointed at a gap in the rocks. They moved down here years ago, after the fire. That's where they hold their real services. You mean the cult? They never stopped, Thomas. They just got smarter. We crawled into the shaft on our stomachs. The tunnel was tight, black, and alive with dripping sounds and the distant scurry of rats. I could barely breathe. The flashlight beams shook as we slid deeper. The walls were marked with symbols, scratches like claw marks, some shaped like spirals, others like bleeding eyes. After what felt like an hour, the tunnel opened into a cavern. The smell hit first, burnt hair, damp ash, and rotting meat. We stayed behind a cracked stone wall, peeking through. There were maybe 20 of them, hooded, silent, standing in a circle around a large slab of rock. On the slab was a goat carcass, still twitching. In the center stood David Aldrich, not in a suit this time. He wore a robe the color of dried blood, and in his hands he held a thick book made of cracked leather. Its cover pulsed like it had a heartbeat. He spoke in a tongue I couldn't understand. His voice echoed, but the sound didn't match the movement of his lips, like something else was speaking through him. Then he said my name, clearly, directly. Thomas Mercer, flesh of the seal, born beneath the black sky. I felt Clara's hand grip my arm. They know you're here, she whispered. But I couldn't move. My legs felt frozen, my body heavy, like the tunnel was breathing with me. A woman stepped forward, young, no older than 20. Her arms were bare and marked with cuts shaped like crescent moons. She held a small boy by the hand. He couldn't have been more than 6. David placed his hand on the boy's head and closed his eyes. The child of the ash, gifted to the Witherborn, he said. That's when the lights went out. Not the flashlights. Not the torches. The cavern itself, every shadow swallowed the light until we were in perfect blackness. And then, from the darkness, something whispered. Not in my ears, in my mind. Come home. The voice was warm, almost kind, like a lullaby from a dream I never remembered having. Clara pulled me back. We have to go. Now. I stumbled after her, trying not to scream as we crawled back through the shaft, the voice growing softer but never leaving. When we burst back into the night air, I dropped to my knees and threw up. Clara was shaking. You saw it, didn't you? I nodded. Then now you know. You were never just born. You were made. I looked down at my hands. They were trembling. Something had called to me down there. And the worst part wasn't that I heard it. It was that deep inside, a part of me had wanted to answer. I sat in the back corner of the old records room, dust swirling in the beam of my flashlight like ash and smoke. The air tasted like rust and mildew. Clara stood near the entrance, keeping an eye on the hallway outside. She looked nervous, more than usual. This place was shut down years ago, she whispered. The doctor who ran it disappeared the same year your mom gave birth to you. The room used to be a clinic. Now it was just a skeleton. Filing cabinets with drawers stuck open, old hospital beds covered in thick cobwebs, mold creeping up the walls. I had only been here once before, when I was a child. My mother had taken me in for a nosebleed that wouldn't stop. I remembered how pale the nurse looked, how she refused to touch me. Here. I pulled open a drawer labeled 1995, Live Births. The folders inside were yellowed and brittle. I searched until I found one with my name. Thomas Mercer. Born November 2nd, 1995. Mother's name, Evelyn Mercer. Father. That was it. Just a line. No name. No signature. No explanation. I flipped through the pages. Blood work. Growth charts. Vaccination logs. And then something strange. A folder within a folder titled Project Halidus. I paused. What the hell is this? I asked, holding it up. Clara came over and took it from me. She read silently, her eyes growing wider by the second. It's a fertility study, she said finally. But not the normal kind. Look at the subheader, Spiritual Conception Trials, Phase 3. They were experimenting with non-physical fertilization, ritual-based seeding. I took the file back, my hands shaking slightly. There were typed notes, clinical, detached, like someone describing a lab rat. Subject, Evelyn Mercer. Consent obtained under influence of the red smoke. Subject exhibited high spiritual receptivity. Ritual performed under lunar blackout conditions. Observed possession lasted 4 minutes, 17 seconds. Conception confirmed via internal burn pattern. Fetus heartbeat detected at 13 days. Irregular. Beneath that was a photo, black and white blurry. It showed my mother strapped to an altar-like slab, symbols drawn across her body in ash and blood. And in the center of her stomach, a faint outline of a star. The same star I saw when I prepared her body. The one that pulsed beneath her skin. I pushed away from the cabinet. My head throbbed. So, I wasn't born like everyone else? I asked. My voice sounded far away, like it came from underwater. Clara knelt beside me. You were used. Your mother was a vessel. That's what this whole thing was about. That's what David wants. David knew about this, I whispered. He's not just continuing the cult. He started it. He was part of this from the beginning. Clara's hands trembled as she opened the last envelope in the file. Inside was a photo of a baby me. But not how a baby should look. My eyes were black. Not dark. Black. Like tar. My skin had marks on it. Symbols etched faintly into the flesh. My breath caught. I didn't know what I was. I didn't know if I was still me. Clara leaned closer, voice soft like a prayer. You're not evil, Thomas. You're human. Whatever they did to you, it's not your fault. I nodded slowly, though I didn't believe her. As we packed the files, I noticed something in the back of the drawer. A cassette tape. No label. Just a crack down the middle and the smell of old smoke. Let's listen to this back at the house, I said. And for the first time since returning to Ashevale, I felt a cold certainty settle deep in my chest. I wasn't born by accident. I wasn't born by love. I was made, and something was coming to collect. I woke up again in the cold, damp forest just outside Ashevale. Dirt caked under my fingernails, and the sharp sting of something wet clung to my skin. My breath came out in ragged gasps, mist curling like ghosts into the morning air. I didn't remember how I got there. The last thing I recalled was sitting at the kitchen table, the journal open before me, Evelyn's words bleeding from the pages. But now the ground beneath me was soft and muddy, and the smell of rotting leaves filled my nose. I sat up slowly, every muscle aching, and wiped my hands on my jeans. That's when I saw it, a thin line of dried blood smeared along my palm, like a twisted signature left behind by some unseen force. Shaking, I climbed back toward the house. The front door creaked as I pushed it open, the familiar scent of old wood and mildew greeting me like a bad memory. I paused in the hallway, eyes adjusting to the dim light. Something felt off, charged, like the air itself was watching me. I made my way to the living room and froze. There, scrawled across the peeling wallpaper in fresh scratches, were symbols I recognized from the journal. Ancient, curling marks that whispered of dark rituals and forgotten curses. My pulse quickened as I traced the shapes with a trembling finger. How had they gotten there? I was the only one home. Later that night, I stared into the cracked mirror above the mantel, hoping to find some rational explanation for the creeping dread. But the reflection didn't quite match my movements. When I raised my hand, the figure lagged behind by a fraction of a second, and the eyes, my eyes, glowed faintly with something unnatural. I blinked hard, stepping back, heart hammering in my chest. Was I losing my mind? Or was something else inside me stirring? I wanted to scream, to shake this feeling loose, but the silence pressed down. The house seemed to hold its breath, waiting. I knew then I wasn't alone. The cult was watching, yes, but worse, whatever had been planted in me was waking up. And it was hungry. The church stood in ruins, but even in its broken state, it breathed a heavy silence that pressed against my chest. The roof was gone, and jagged beams clawed at the sky like desperate fingers. I hesitated at the cracked doorway, the smell of wet earth and something long dead curling in the air. Clara's hand tightened around mine, steadying me, though I could tell she felt the weight too. We slipped inside, our footsteps muffled by damp debris and fallen plaster. The pews were splintered and rotted, but it was the basement that called to me, the place where I was born beneath a cold, shadowed floor. The wooden stairs creaked as we descended, each step deeper into darkness. The air grew colder and thicker. My breath fogged in front of me. In the faint light, I saw it, a shrine carved directly into the stone wall. Blood stains had dried into dark cracks around it, and scattered on the ground were brittle bones, small and fragile, infant bones. My stomach twisted and my throat closed tight. Carved into the stone was the prophecy. The letters were jagged, as if clawed out by something angry. Born on the sigil. The vessel is sealed. Blood wakes. Flesh opens. The witherborn comes. I traced the words with a trembling finger, and suddenly pain burst behind my eyes. I clutched my head, staggering back. My vision blurred, and when I blinked, I saw it. Scenes flashing in my mind's eye like an old film reel. I was there. The night I was born. The pentagram wasn't ink. It burned into my mother's skin, glowing a terrible red. And inside that fiery symbol, something moved, a creature half-formed, writhing, crawling out from the very mark that had sealed me. I gasped, falling to my knees. Blood welled up from my eyes, warm and thick, blurring the shrine before me. Clara's voice was distant, calling my name, but I couldn't tear my gaze away. The creature's whispers filled my head, ancient and hungry. I wanted to scream, but no sound came out. The Witherborn was not just a legend. It was inside me, waiting, growing. I knew then that this place wasn't just the past, it was my future, and the only way out was through the darkness. The sky was a bruised purple when I found the message. It was scrawled in black ink on a torn piece of parchment, pinned to the broken wooden door of the old coal shed where Clara had told me they met. The words burned into my mind as if the ink were fire. It is time. A cold wind swept through the dead grass around me, whispering like 1,000 voices just beyond hearing. The air tasted heavy, thick with the promise of something terrible. Asheville had always been a quiet town, but now, even the silence screamed. Electric storms rumbled low on the horizon, splitting the sky with jagged veins of lightning. The power flickered in the farmhouse, shadows dancing on the peeling walls like ghosts I could almost touch. At night, the town seemed to rot from the inside out. Dead animals lined the roads, their eyes glassy and accusing. People I once knew wore hollow stares, moving like puppets with frayed strings. I gripped the blackened blade tighter, the one I had found hidden in my mother's old wardrobe. It was cold to the touch, heavy, etched with strange glowing symbols that pulsed faintly under my skin. I had no idea what the blade was or where it came from, but something about it felt like a promise. A promise that I could fight this. The cult had taken Clara. They left no doubt. That message was both a challenge and a warning. My heart hammered against my ribs as I stepped out onto the cracked road leading toward the mines, the place I had feared since the first time Clara dragged me into those dark tunnels. The earth beneath me seemed to shift with every step, like the town itself was breathing, alive and waiting. My skin prickled, a low hum rising in my ears, and I knew they were watching. David and his followers, waiting for me to arrive, to finish what was started so many years ago. The darkness wrapped around me like a shroud as I reached the mine's entrance. The air was colder here, carrying the scent of damp earth and something sour, something ancient. I hesitated only a moment before stepping inside. The blackness swallowed me whole. Inside, the chanting began, a low, guttural sound that vibrated through my bones. The flicker of candles lit the cavern, casting monstrous shadows on the jagged walls. At the center, David stood tall, his eyes gleaming with a terrible light. His voice was calm, but every word was a blade. Evelyn tried to stop what was born, but only scarred the flesh, not the soul. My body trembled as the runes began to glow across my skin. They burned like cold fire, crawling from my shoulders down to my hands, marking me as the vessel they had been waiting for. Clara's face appeared in my mind, her terrified eyes begging me to fight. I swallowed my fear and tightened my grip on the blade. Whatever came next, I would meet it head-on. Because this time I was ready. The stale air of the mine bit at my lungs as I stepped deeper into the darkness. Flickering torchlight danced on the jagged walls, throwing long shadows that twisted and writhed like living things. I could hear the faint chanting before I saw them. The cult, gathered in a circle around a crude altar carved from stone and bone. David stood at the center, his eyes shining with a cold fire. His voice was calm, but every word felt like a curse sinking into my skin. "The time has come," he said, his gaze locking onto mine. "Your mother tried to stop it with fire, but fire only scars the flesh. The soul remains untouched. Tonight, the vessel shall awaken." A shiver crawled up my spine as I took a step forward, but my body was not entirely my own. The runes that had been burning beneath my skin flared suddenly, a searing heat spreading through my flesh. I felt like I was on fire from the inside out. Clara's voice broke through the haze. "Fight it, Thomas. Don't let it take you." I tried to respond, to scream, but my throat was dry, and my limbs moved with the sluggishness of someone trapped beneath water. The chanting grew louder, more urgent. The cult's voices merged into a terrible roar that echoed in my head. The world blurred. I saw the pentagram glowing on my mother's stomach, not ink, but a scar that pulsed with dark life. David raised his hands, and the air seemed to thicken, squeezing the breath from my lungs. I struggled against the shadow crawling inside me, the demon's voice whispering promises of power and pain. It wanted me to surrender, to let the ritual finish. But something inside me burned brighter, a flicker of defiance. I gritted my teeth, feeling the cold weight of the blade in my pocket. This was my last chance. With everything I had left, I reached down and pulled the blade free. The metal felt alive, humming with a strange energy. I pressed it against my stomach, right over the pentagram's burning mark. Pain exploded through me like a thunderclap, hot and sharp and raw. I screamed, but I kept cutting, carving through skin and muscle, breaking the seal that bound the demon to me. The cult's chanting faltered. David's face twisted in fury. The fire inside me screamed, then shattered. Darkness exploded from my wound, swirling like smoke, then vanished into nothingness. I collapsed to the ground, trembling and gasping for air. The ritual was broken. For now. The darkness inside me was heavier than any shadow I'd ever known. It wasn't just in my mind. It was a living thing, pulsing and writhing beneath my skin. I could feel it coiling around my spine, like a fetus made of fire and smoke, burning but never consumed. It whispered, low and harsh, its voice crawling through my veins. "You cannot run from me, Thomas," it hissed. "I am the blood that birthed you, the fire that forged you. Give in, and you will be whole. Resist, and everything you love will turn to ash." My hands trembled as I pressed them against my stomach, the place where the pentagram had once burned into my flesh. The pain there was a constant pulse, a dull, aching reminder of what I was. I wanted to scream, to tear the thing out of me, but I was trapped inside my own body, fighting for control over a soul that wasn't fully mine. The world around me twisted and blurred. I wasn't in the mines anymore, but inside some twisted reflection of myself, a place where the walls dripped with blood and the air tasted of iron and death. The creature appeared before me, monstrous and flickering, half-formed and burning like coals in a dying fire. "You fear me," it said, "but I am your strength, your purpose. Without me, you are nothing." I felt Clara's voice distant, calling to me through the haze. "Fight it, Thomas. You're stronger than this. You're not a monster." The words anchored me for a moment. I clenched my fists and pushed back against the darkness. The creature roared in fury, its flames licking at the edges of my mind. I reached down and, with trembling fingers, grasped the black blade I had hidden in my coat, the blade blessed by the exorcist, heavy and cold in my hand. With every ounce of will I had left, I lifted the blade and pressed it against my stomach, where the pentagram still glowed faintly beneath the surface. The pain exploded, sharp and searing, like the fire inside me was finally meeting the outside world. I carved through my skin, ignoring the screams that echoed in my head. The burning fetus writhed and shrieked, trying to pull me under, but I held firm, driving the blade deeper. The mark was coming out, and with it, the demon's hold weakened. The creature's voice became a desperate howl, fading into nothingness as smoke and embers spilled from my wound. I collapsed to the ground, gasping, my hands slick with blood. The darkness that had held me captive was breaking apart, piece by piece. I didn't know if I had won. All I knew was that, for the first time in my life, I was free, if only for a moment. And that moment was enough. The air was thick with dust, and the sharp smell of burning wood. The tunnels around us groaned and cracked as if the earth itself was tearing apart. Clara was coughing, clutching her side, and I could feel my own breath coming in ragged gasps. We had barely escaped the ritual chamber when the whole place began to collapse. David's screams echoed behind us, half rage, half agony. The fire he'd summoned to complete the ritual had turned against him. His body burned in a way that was unnatural, black smoke curling from his flesh. I didn't look back. There was no point. The demon was gone, or at least beaten back, but the damage was done. We stumbled into the fresh air outside, coughing and blinking in the weak dawn light. The world seemed quieter now, but the shadows still clung to the corners of Ashvale like a stain that wouldn't wash away. Clara sank to the ground, exhausted and pale. I sat beside her, staring down at my stomach where the pentagram had once been burned deep into my flesh. The scar was raw and angry, but it was mine. I had carved it out with that strange blade, the black metal that seemed to burn cold in my hand. The demon inside me had screamed when I cut, a sound that echoed in my mind like the death rattle of something ancient. But then silence. A hollow silence that filled me with a strange mix of relief and dread. I touched the scar lightly, fingertips trembling. The pain was fading, but the whispers were not. "You bled me out, but not all of me." I swallowed hard and looked at Clara. Her eyes held fear, but also something stronger, hope. "We stopped it," she said, voice barely above a whisper. I wasn't so sure. Some part of me felt empty, as if a shadow had been pulled free, but still lingered just beyond my reach. The bloodline, the curse, the darkness, they hadn't been destroyed. They had only been forced back into hiding. Ashevale was quiet again, but I knew it was only the calm before the storm. I was born on a pentagram tattooed into my mother's stomach. It wasn't ink. It was a brand, one that marked me as something other, something dangerous. And now I was free. But free wasn't the same as safe. The night held its breath, and so did I.